Do you really think fish care about that expensive new lure you just bought? Here is a hard truth for you. You can have the best gear in the world, cast into the exact same spot where you caught a monster last week, and still go home with absolutely nothing. Why? Because you are completely ignoring the one invisible wall that dictates exactly where every fish in that lake is holding today: water temperature. I'm not talking about the weather outside. I am talking about subtle, almost unnoticeable shifts in the water that completely change fish behavior. Today, I'm going to show you why casting blindly is a fool's game and how a tiny temperature shift can leave you sitting in a dead zone. Stick around, because what you are about to hear might just make you throw out half of your tackle box. Tell me right now in the comments, do you even look at a water thermometer before you cast? Or are you just guessing? We have all been there. You wake up before dawn, load up the truck and head to that one spot that always produces fish. It is the spot your dad showed you, or the one where you had that epic day last spring. You tie on your favorite rig, cast out and wait and wait. Hours go by and your bobber does not even twitch. The old school guys will tell you the fish just are not biting today. They will blame the wind, the moon phase, or maybe just bad luck. But here is the reality. The fish are still in that lake and they are still hungry. They just moved. And they moved because the water temperature in your favorite spot changed by just a fraction. Most fishermen spend decades doing the exact same thing, casting into the exact same structure, without ever realizing that fish are cold-blooded creatures. Their entire life revolves around finding the perfect comfort zone. If you do not understand how temperature layers work, you are basically fishing in the desert. Let us start by picturing a classic morning on the water. The sun is barely coming up over the trees, the mist is rolling off the surface, and the lake is dead silent. You make your first cast right near a fallen log. It looks like the absolute perfect base habitat. You slowly retrieve your bait, expecting that familiar aggressive strike at any second. But nothing happens. You cast again, maybe a little closer to the wood. This time, still nothing. You start wondering if you picked the wrong color worm or if your presentation is just off today. But what you cannot see from the boat is that the water right around that log is completely empty. The night air cooled the shallow water down by just 2 degrees, and that was enough to push every single decent-sized fish out towards the nearest drop-off. You are casting into a ghost, all because you assumed the fish would be exactly where they were yesterday afternoon when the sun was baking that shallow flat. It is time to break a major myth that has been passed down from generation to generation. How many times have you heard an older fisherman say that fish always hold tight to cover no matter what? We are taught to target docks, weeds, and laydowns blindly, but cover means absolutely nothing if the water temperature is wrong. Think about it like this. Imagine you are sitting in a room with a comfortable chair, but the air conditioning is blasting right on your neck, making you freeze. You are not going to sit in that chair, no matter how nice it is. You are going to move to a warmer spot. Fish do the exact same thing. A beautiful weed bed in shallow water is useless to a fish if a cold front just rolled through and dropped the temperature. They will abandon that premium cover and suspend over open, deeper water simply because it is a few degrees warmer and more stable. Stop fishing memories and start fishing the conditions that actually exist right in front of you today. Let us talk about the concept of the thermocline, because this is where a lot of guys get completely lost. You are sitting out there in the middle of summer, the sun is beating down, and you are sweating through your shirt. You figure the surface water is way too hot, so the fish must be holding right at the very bottom of the lake. You tie on a heavy jig and start dragging it through the deepest holes you can find. You do this for 3 hours and do not get a single tap. Why? Because you dropped your bait straight past the fish and into the dead zone. In deep lakes during the summer, the water separates into distinct layers. The top layer is warm and the bottom layer is freezing cold and lacks oxygen. Right in between those two is the thermocline, a narrow band of water where the temperature is absolutely perfect and the oxygen is rich. Every fish in the lake is hanging out in that middle layer, while you are dragging your bait through barren mud at the bottom. The biggest mistake I see out on the water is guys refusing to adapt to the morning warm-up. Picture this scenario. You get out on the water at first light and head straight to the shallow flats. The water is cold from the night before and the bite is incredibly slow. You fish there for 2 hours, get frustrated, and decide to move to deeper water for the rest of the day. But right as you leave, the morning sun starts baking those shallows. By noon, that shallow flat has warmed up by 3 or 4 degrees. Suddenly, all the baitfish move up into the skinny water to feed, and the big predators follow right behind them. The spot you abandoned because it was dead in the morning is now the hottest spot on the entire lake, but you are out in deep water, struggling to get a bite, totally unaware that the shallow water temperature has completely shifted the game. You have to monitor those subtle daytime changes if you want to stay on the fish. Let me ask you a question. When you look at the wind blowing across the lake, what do you see? Most fishermen just see an annoyance. They see choppy water that makes boat control difficult and casting a nightmare. So, they hide. They find a quiet, protected cove where the water is calm and flat as glass. It is comfortable for the fisherman, sure, but it is usually a terrible strategy for catching fish. Here is the secret about wind and water temperature. The wind actually pushes the warmest surface water across the lake. If it is early spring and the water is generally cold, that wind is stacking warmer water against the windward bank. That means the water temperature on the windy side of the lake might be 2 or 3 degrees warmer than the calm, protected cove you are hiding in. And in cold water, 2 degrees is a massive deal. It is enough to trigger a feeding frenzy. By hiding from the wind, you are literally hiding from the active, hungry fish. Spring fishing is probably the most frustrating time for guys who do not understand temperature. Everyone gets spring fever. The ice melts, the sun comes out, and guys rush to the lake, throwing spinnerbaits and topwater lures like it is the middle of July. You watch a guy casting a fast-moving bait near the bank, burning it back to the boat and wondering why he is not getting chased. The reality is that the water is still incredibly cold. Fish are cold-blooded, which means their metabolism is completely tied to the temperature of their environment. In frigid spring water, a fish is moving in slow motion. They literally do not have the physical energy to chase down a fast-moving lure. You have to slow down, I mean painfully slow. You need to present a bait that stays right in their face for a long time, tempting them to take an easy, low-energy meal. If your retrieve is too fast for the current water temperature, you are just practicing your casting. Let us look at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the dog days of summer. The water feels like a warm bathtub, and the bite has completely shut down. You are out there at 2 in the afternoon, casting a plastic worm under docks, wiping sweat from your forehead and cursing the heat. You probably think the fish are just lazy and not feeding at all, but that is a trap. In extremely hot water, the oxygen levels drop dramatically. Fish feel lethargic and stressed, just like you would if you were locked in a sauna. They are not going to waste energy chasing a meal in 90-degree water, but this does not mean they stop eating. It means they change their feeding windows. They wait for the water to cool down just a fraction, usually in the middle of the night or right before dawn. By the time you finish your morning coffee and launch your boat at 8 o'clock, you have already missed the only active feeding window of the entire day. Now think about the rain. Most casual anglers pack up their gear and head for the truck the second they feel a few raindrops. They hate getting wet. But a smart fisherman knows that rain can drastically alter the water temperature and flip the bite like a light switch. Imagine a hot summer afternoon. The surface water is baking and the fish are deep and sluggish. Suddenly, a heavy afternoon thunderstorm rolls in. The rain pouring down into the lake is significantly cooler than the surface water. This sudden influx of cool, oxygen-rich water hits the shallows and immediately drops the temperature by a few degrees. It is like a breath of fresh air for the fish. The bait fish become active, and the big predators move up instantly to start feeding. If you put on a rain jacket and keep casting while everyone else is running for cover, you might experience the best hour of fishing you have had all month. Rain changes the temperature, and temperature changes everything. Let us talk about electronics for a minute. Everyone today has a fancy screen on their boat. They spend thousands of dollars on fish finders, side imaging, and live sonar. They stare at the screen all day, looking for little arches and dots. But I will tell you a secret. The most important number on that entire expensive screen is not the depth, and it is not the sonar return. It is that little number sitting up in the top corner, the surface water temperature. Too many guys ignore it completely. They see fish on the screen, drop a bait down, and cannot understand why the fish will not bite. What they do not realize is that the temperature reading is telling them a story about the mood of the fish. If you notice the temperature is steadily dropping throughout the day because of a cold front, you should instantly know that the fish are going to get tight-lipped and tuck close to the bottom. Your electronics are useless if you ignore the temperature data. There is an old grandfather myth that says fish always bite best when the water is rising. People think that rising water floods new areas and gives fish more places to feed. That can be true, but it is only half the story. The real question you need to ask is, where is that rising water coming from and what is its temperature? If you get a heavy spring rain and cold, muddy runoff starts pouring into the back of your favorite creek, it is going to ruin the fishing in that area. That sudden rush of freezing water shocks the fish. It drops the localized temperature rapidly, pushing the fish out of the creek and back out to the main lake, where the water is more stable. On the flip side, a warm rain washing into a cool lake can draw fish in like a magnet. You cannot just look at the water level. You have to understand the temperature of the water that is entering the system. Have you ever fished a river or a stream and noticed how much harder it is to pattern the fish compared to a lake? That is because moving water mixes constantly, making the temperature much more uniform from top to bottom. In a lake, the fish can move up or down a few feet to find their perfect comfort zone, but in a fast-flowing river, they do not have that luxury. The water temperature is generally what it is, everywhere. So how do they survive sudden temperature swings? They look for springs. Imagine you are wading in a river, casting a small spinner. You step into a pocket of water near the bank, and suddenly it feels noticeably cooler against your waders. You just found a cold water spring bubbling up from underground. In the heat of summer, that tiny pocket of cooler water is an absolute sanctuary for fish. Every trout or smallmouth in that stretch of river will be stacked up right there, waiting for you to cast. It is funny how we get stuck in our routines. We go out to the lake, find a spot where we caught fish last week, and we just assume they will still be there. You spend an hour casting a crankbait over a rocky point, totally convinced that the fish are just waiting to be caught. You tell yourself to just be patient. But patience is a virtue only when you are in the right spot. Let us say a massive, cold front pushed through the night before. The air temperature dropped and the sky is crystal clear. That rocky point you are fishing? The water there just plummeted by 4 degrees. The fish did not just sit there and shiver. They abandoned the point completely and pulled back to the closest deep water drop-off where the water temperature is perfectly insulated and stable. Your patience is completely wasted. You are casting into memories, not reality. You have to chase the comfort zone, not the map coordinates. I want you to picture the shadow of a giant oak tree stretching across the water. It is a hot summer morning, and you are working a topwater frog right along the edge of the shade line. Most guys just think shade is good because it hides the fish from predators and the bright sun, but shade is actually all about microclimates. The water inside that shadow can be 2 to 3 degrees cooler than the water sitting right next to it in the direct sunlight. That tiny difference is everything. A base will position itself perfectly in the cooler, oxygen-rich water of the shadow, looking out into the brightly lit, warmer water to ambush prey. As the day goes on and the sun moves, that shadow moves. And guess what? The fish move right along with it. If you are not paying attention to how the sun is affecting the localized surface temperature, you are going to be casting in the wrong spot by noon. Fall fishing is famous for being incredibly productive, but it also completely confuses guys who rely on old habits. In the fall, the days get shorter and the cool nights start to drop the surface temperature of the lake. This triggers something called the fall turnover. Suddenly, the nice, stable layers of water we talked about in the summer start to mix together. The warm surface water cools down, gets heavy, and sinks, pushing the cold bottom water up to the top. The whole lake becomes a swirling mess of changing temperatures and floating debris. You might go out on a Saturday and find the water looks like muddy coffee, and you cannot buy a bite. Most guys give up and go home to watch football, but the smart angler knows that during the turnover you have to look for stability. You abandon the main lake and run as far up into the shallow creeks as possible, where the water cooled down weeks ago and has already stabilized. Let us talk about rocks, just plain old rocks. A lot of fishermen love throwing their baits around rocky banks, riprap, and concrete bridges, but they usually do it for the wrong reason. They think rocks are just good cover for crawfish and baitfish. While that is true, rocks are actually massive thermal heaters. Imagine a sunny day in the early spring. The air is still chilly, but the bright sun is beating down on a bank covered in dark rocks. Those rocks absorb the heat from the sun and slowly radiate it directly into the water. The water temperature right against that rocky bank might be 5 degrees warmer than the rest of the lake. That is a massive thermal difference. It draws in the baitfish, and the predators follow. If you are fishing a muddy bank on the shaded side of the lake while ignoring the sun-baked rocks on the other side, you are actively choosing to fish in the coldest, deadest water available. There is a massive misconception about fishing at night. People think the fish bite at night simply because it is dark and they feel safer hunting. That plays a role, sure. But the primary driver for the night bite in the middle of summer is temperature relief. Think about a brutally hot August day. The surface temperature is pushing 90 degrees. The fish are pinned to the bottom, barely breathing. But as the sun sets, the air cools down and the surface of the lake begins to radiate heat away. The top layer of water cools by a few degrees. Suddenly, it becomes comfortable again. The fish rise up from the depths and start actively hunting in the shallows under the cover of darkness. If you only fish from 9 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon during the summer, you are literally fishing during the most hostile temperature conditions of the entire day. You are making it as hard on yourself as possible. Muddy water is another thing that completely changes the temperature dynamic. Most guys hate muddy water. They think the fish cannot see their lure, so they leave. But muddy water absorbs heat from the sun significantly faster than clear water. It is just like wearing a black shirt on a sunny day instead of a white one. If you are fishing in the early spring and you find a cove where the water is heavily stained or muddy, do not leave. Check the temperature. Because the mud particles absorb the solar radiation, that muddy cove will warm up much faster than the crystal-clear main lake. Even a 1-degree bump in dirty water can trigger a massive feeding response from fish that are trying to shake off the winter chill. Instead of worrying about whether they can see your bait, tie on something noisy, get in that warm, muddy water, and get ready for a strike. Now imagine you are out on a massive, deep reservoir. It is late fall and the water is getting downright cold. You are bundled up in a heavy coat, casting deep, diving crankbaits and feeling absolutely nothing. You feel like the entire lake has shut down for the winter. But then you notice something. You see a power plant or an industrial factory on the shoreline with water discharging from a pipe. A lot of guys will avoid that area because it looks unnatural. But that discharge is often warm water being pumped back into the lake. That single pipe is creating an artificial warm water sanctuary in the middle of a freezing lake. The temperature right there could be 10 degrees warmer than anywhere else. It is an absolute magnet for every species of fish in the area. They will stack up in that warm water plume like cordwood. Recognizing these man-made temperature changes can absolutely save a cold day on the water. Let us talk about your actual tackle for a second, because temperature completely dictates what you should tie on the end of your line. I see guys throwing aggressive, wide-wobbling crankbaits in 40-degree water, and it drives me crazy. They think they need to trigger a reaction strike, but a fish in frigid water has a completely slowed-down metabolism. They are not going to chase a fast, erratic bait. In cold water, you need baits with a tight, subtle action. Flat-sided crankbaits, suspending jerkbaits that sit perfectly still in the water column for 10 seconds at a time, or tiny jigs dragged at a snail's pace. Conversely, in hot water, when the fish are highly active and aggressive, that is when you break out the wide-wobbling, loud, fast-moving baits, you have to match the action of your lure to the energy level of the fish. And the energy level of the fish is 100% controlled by the water temperature. The ultimate takeaway here is that you need to stop fishing on autopilot. Every time you pull up to a spot, you need to ask yourself why the fish should be there right now at this exact moment. Not yesterday, not last year, but today. The water is a living, breathing environment that is constantly shifting. A cold night, a hot afternoon, a sudden rainstorm, or a change in the wind direction all create subtle temperature shifts that dictate fish movement. You can either be the guy who stubbornly casts into dead water because it used to be a good spot, or you can be the angler who reads the conditions, understands the thermal layers, and tracks the fish down to where they are actually holding. Get yourself a good water thermometer, start paying attention to the numbers on your sonar, and watch how quickly your luck changes, because once you understand temperature, it is no longer about luck at all. It is just a matter of time. So here is the ultimate plot twist you need to remember next time you hit the water. The fish are not outsmarting you, and they did not disappear from the lake. They just moved a few yards away to stay comfortable. That subtle 1 or 2 degree shift that you completely ignored was the invisible wall standing between you and the best catch of your life. Understanding that fish are completely bound by water temperature changes absolutely everything about how you approach a lake. You will stop wasting hours pounding dead shallow water after a cold front, and you will stop dragging the bottom during the dog days of summer when the fish are suspended right in the thermocline. You will start fishing like a predator, hunting for the right conditions instead of just hoping for a bite. Thank you so much for watching. If this video made you rethink your strategy, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment below. I want to know right now, what is the most stubborn old fishing myth you still catch yourself believing? Let us argue about it in the comments.